All right. What does success look like? On the screen, or the semblance of screen that we have, you can see a contrast of images. We could go back to the first image. Um, One of it is a gentleman that's dressed in a suit. He's Joseph Yiga, he's an alumnus. Um, to his side is a performer, a rock and roll performer in Eastern Europe called Daniel Stranger. One is well suited and one is a little bit liberal in his dress. So if you were to ask a random Ugandan, who of them is a quintessentially or a commonly upheld visual representation of what Ugandans understand as success? Having some lived experience in Uganda, I would wager to bet that it's the gentleman in the suit. Disclaimer, both of them are very successful and both of them are alumni and very upheld members of our alumni organization. So what does success indeed look like? You could go to the second image. All right. So to the left is a mansion. And to the right, you could move to the right. To the right is an abstract image. It was displayed in a gallery in Eastern Europe, in Russia, St. Petersburg. So once again, if you were to ask a typical average Ugandan, which of them brings up an image of success in their head? A mansion with a lush compound, or an abstract image of art? Again, having some lived experience in this part of the world, I would wager to bet that it's the image to the left, the mansion. So again, I wager to ask, what does success look like? But before we even get into what it looks like, what is success in the first place? Well, the Oxford Learner's definition of success is accomplishing an aim. Very simple definition, right? So, for example, if I want to touch my neck, that's my aim. Well, it's a very simple one, and I go ahead and I touch my neck. I'm successful. See, very simple definition of success. And that's a personal definition of success. Well, but because humans are not solitary beings and we live in community and we interact with people, success has both a personal definition and a group or societal definition, depending on where one lives and their context. And basing on the nature of this event, we are going to concern ourselves with one major group and their definition of success. And that is the four most brilliant minds among us. And the easiest sample space of that are alumni of mission legacy schools. Among those is St. Mary's College Kisubi, or King's College Budo, or Namilyango College, and many others. So in these mission legacy schools, which are disproportionately influential, what do they view as success? You could move on to the other image. So that's those are administration blocks. To the left is the administration block of Budo. In the middle is Namilyango, and to the right is St. Mary's College Kisubi. So to understand what these four most brilliant minds view as success, we need to have a little bit of history of how these institutions were founded. So these institutions were founded in the early 1900s, chiefly by the Church Missionary Society on the Anglican side, and the White Fathers and many other Roman Catholic groups at the time. And the idea behind them was to have a cultural segmentation of the four most brilliant minds in the country. A cultural segmentation in the sense of bureaucrats, people to work in administration, technocrats, people to take on technical work, and then there were the aristocrats and the royals. And this cultural segmentation was part of a colonial cultural mapping of how they wanted the society to be governed or to be administered. Uh, but as time went on, these cultural segmentations took on a life of their own. A bureaucrat class developed, a technocrat class, and even the royals themselves. Uh, but as this went on, it wasn't just the internal culture of these institutions that mattered. It was how the external people viewed them. And the views of the external people take in mind the social context in which they exist. Uh, and the social context of the time was that of colonialism. But as years have passed, that social context has developed. We've had political instabilities. We've not so far had a peaceful transfer of power, speaking at the presidential level. We've had some financial instability and turmoil. We've had, and as a result of that, we've had social phenomenon like poverty, trauma, and many others that have influenced the way in which we view success. So, as these segmented classes of people were developing down the ages, post colonialism, what happened is their view of success was not merely an internal view, but the view of those who were around them. In other words, they weren't just acting out success to themselves, but they were also cosplaying it to the people around them, depending on the external views that they had, informed by these social factors like poverty, trauma, political instability, and the like. And as a result, they developed a way they viewed success not totally dependent on themselves, but the people around them. I'll give you an example. If I want to go back to the village and or my rural setting, and I want to display at least to the people, my benefactors who've been generous to me, that hey, this is the result of what you have put into me. I will put some effort into the means of transport that I take, right? Numiabates. So, anyways, so that would materialize in the form of, for example, the car that I take, or the handouts that I give to people while I'm leaving. And those are all factors influenced by the social settings in which we are. Uh, it might also factor into the type of house that I look to build. Just to contrast myself to the financial scarcity that's around me, it even translates into the nature of leaders that we have. If you have people who want to contrast themselves to the financial scarcity around them, that's how you end up with people hoarding resources from the public purse in pursuit of that. So, given how our four most brilliant minds have conceptualized success, their most prevalent view seems to be that of accumulation. Let me get as much as I can so that I can counter signal the lack that surround me. That's the point of view that I'd like to call accumulation. For tonight's talk, I'd like to propose to you that a superior metric of success, a superior way of defining success, is impact. So, in other words, we'd like to redefine success from accumulation to impact. And I contend that impact is a superior metric of success as opposed to accumulation. So I ask, why impact? Well, for several reasons. One is that anything less than impact as a metric of success would be pure selfishness from people like you lovely people in the audience. Chiefly because if you were to take it down, for example, from alumni of a school like St. Mary's College, Kisubi, they've been blessed with both resource and context to be able to do more than accumulation. And so destiny, posterity is counting upon us to view success more than just accumulation, but impact. So anything less than that would be selfish because of what nature has afforded us. But also, secondly, because accumulation is such a lowly way to view success, because if you were to have impact in in the first place, you would need resources. And resources would cater both for your sustenance and also what you would need to make that impact happen. So already by focusing on impact, you have resources covered in a monetary sense. But also, thirdly, because if we view impact as our superior metric of success, we build things for posterity. We don't build things for our immediate lives, for our nuclear family, for our immediate institutions, but while building, whether it be financial institutions, whether it be social institutions that bind our communities together, we build for generations ahead. And that's an attitude that would come in handy in terms of how we play out our success in the communities in which we are. So to go into it in a very practical sense, how do we shift our metric of success from accumulation to impact? I'd suggest 4 ways. The foremost way that I would suggest is get them while they're young. Begin with the young minds. And what would that entail? It would entail the learning programs that we have in our institutions. We would, for example, prioritize aspects like emotional intelligence more than just class smarts when people are still in their formative teenage years. Because we can't talk about impact without empathy. We can't talk about impact without self-regulation. So we would be able to cultivate minds that are able to put themselves in other people's shoes or are able to regulate their base impulses. And by cultivating that while they're still young, already they're developing a metric of success that's impact focused. But also, secondly, we would emphasize three transcendental values: truth, beauty, and goodness in the learning programs that we offer at institutional level, but also at communal level. By focusing, for example, on beauty, we would cultivate minds that prioritize a long-term impulse for aesthetics as opposed to building things in the short term. By focusing on truth, we'd cultivate minds that are focused on the knowledge economy as opposed to merely having tangible impact, having tangible resources there and then. And also, I would, the third way for us to be able to cultivate a metric of success that moves away purely from accumulation to impact is by having impact gauges, having indexes that prioritize impact or rank things in impact. In Uganda, when we are speaking about schools and ranking what we see as a good school or institutions, usually we prioritize old metrics like or what they produce on a test or what percentage of students go through this standardized sort of procedure. But what if impact was one of the metrics that we look at in terms of institutions? The same way companies have ESG scores or DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we would have indexes that focus on tracking impact in terms of institutions or companies or alumni communities. And fourthly, I'd like to say that all this sounds a little bit too complex. Dare I say, sometimes when you think about mapping out how societies view success, it seems like such a broad thing that to think about it would almost be to have a God complex. Which brings me to my fourth point. Give yourself permission. Give yourself permission. I've interfaced with people who do great things. They're extraordinarily ordinary, you know. Someone who goes through institutions at a college level, for example, Stanford or Harvard for that matter, or Yale, the ordinary people, and they go on in different spheres in which they occupy to have an impact-driven metric of success. It begins with giving yourself permission. You are no different from them. But at the same time, we must plan ahead in terms of building things for posterity. And on the point of planning ahead, I'd like to introduce something that I've been working on. And this is solely focused on St. Mary's College, Kisubi. We've pulled together resources with a bunch of financially able people to introduce what's going to be called the SMACK Creatives Fund. It's something that I've hinted at. And this is a fund that's going to be funneled towards people who are doing groundbreaking things in the area of creatives. Why am I speaking about this? Is at the end of the day, all these ideas are good, but all things take off when there's a financial wheel and oil. So basically, the last point would be social finance, pulling together resources, having cultural patrons, people who are able to finance impact-driven initiatives, and then tracking them through impact gauges. Going back to my second last point is all this seem like grand initiatives, all this seems like grand talk, but we give ourselves permission. By the mere fact that these ideas have dropped into our heads, it means we are their due possessors. So give yourself permission, and leading by example, I will give myself permission to end here. Thank you.